We begin with the latest in the diplomatic standoff between Washington and Tehran. Iran says it's now received the U.S. reply to its latest peace proposal and is reviewing that response. This comes after Donald Trump appeared to cast doubt on the plan, describing it as likely unacceptable. The 14-point proposal sets a 30-day deadline for the U.S. to lift its blockade of Iranian ports and an end to military operations on all fronts, including Israel's war in Lebanon. Let's bring in Dr. Sara Bazoobandi. She's a non-resident fellow at the Institute for Security Policy at Kiel University. Welcome, Sara. So we've heard from an Iranian foreign ministry spokesperson who stressed that this 14-point plan, quote, exclusively focuses on ending the war in the region, including in Lebanon, and does not touch the nuclear issue. So what does that tell us about Iran's strategy right now?
Thank you for having me, Mariana. Yes, you're absolutely right. The nuclear file and the conversations around the nuclear project and Iran's aspirations for developing its nuclear capabilities have completely dropped off the agenda. This crisis has changed objectives from the outset. From the very early stages of the crisis, that was a call to liberate the Iranian people, quote unquote, put forward by the Israeli and American leadership. It has changed to demolishing Iran's nuclear capabilities and its missile capabilities, and now it has completely downgraded to a crisis over the Strait of Hormuz. And the Iranian government had managed to, I would say, successfully change the dynamics of the crisis. And it seems that now there is a very high price to be paid by the global community because of the rising economic pressure, because of the trade blockade, because of the rising energy prices, and so on and so forth. And I expect the Islamic Republic to use and utilize these points to their best interest in the negotiations.
Well, for their part, Israeli officials have been insisting that any agreement has to include a complete stop to Iran's enrichment program. I'm just wondering, what influence does that Israeli position have on what Washington is going to be willing to accept?
I don't think Washington and Jerusalem are very far apart from their vision for future of Iran's nuclear program, to be honest. President Trump has made that very clear time and again that what he refers to as nuclear dust or the enriched material has to be taken out of the country to be diluted. He wants it to be done by the American experts or at the presence of American experts. I'm not quite clear about that. But and he also wants a complete dismantling of Iran's nuclear project. And I don't think this is far away from what Mr. Netanyahu has in mind about that.
Well, you mentioned it yourself just a moment ago, the impact on global energy prices, and even in the United States, fuel prices continue to climb. To what extent does that kind of domestic pressure inside the U.S. shape the Trump administration's thinking when it comes to Iran?
I think I'm not the first analyst to refer to this crisis as a staring contest. It seems that both sides are now waiting for their adversary to give up and walk away from this crisis. It is really a matter of who can bear more pressure and more pain. And I think the assumptions in Tehran is that President Trump is going to become under increasing and mounting amount of pressure domestically, not just because of the energy prices and generally rise of cost of living and inflation in the United States, but also because of the challenges he will face in the Congress, and the midterms elections are coming up soon within the next months in this year, end of this year. So Tehran really is banking on all of these pressure to force President Trump to give up and somehow declare some sort of victory and walk away from this crisis. I'm not quite convinced that this would be ultimately the decision and the destiny and the future of this crisis. To be honest, unfortunately, there are also still high possibilities for further escalations by all parties involved.
That was Dr. Sara Bazoobandi from the Institute for Security Policy at Keele University. Thank you so much for your insights. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Let's bring in Dr. Rowena Binti Abdul Razak. She's a Middle East history lecturer at the University of London's School of Oriental and African Studies. And we welcome you, Rowena. What is your take on the Iranian plan? Is it a reasonable proposal, or is it wishful thinking?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a good question. It's part of a long process that we've seen, going back over 10 years, really, because Iran's peace proposal is not just about the ceasefire, but about having a longer-term solution to having some sort of proper negotiations between Iran and the US. This goes back to the JCPOA agreement. So at the heart of this current proposal is actually the nuclear deal. So we're not just looking at short term, we're looking at long term. So this indicates that Iran is looking for something bigger. And it's not just about the Straits of Hormuz, it's also about the lifting of sanctions and so on. So I think what we're seeing here is Iran and the US on two different kinds of trajectories. The US is looking for something short-term, something that it can declare a quick victory and to show that its military actions were justified. And Iran is trying to find something that can last for much longer.
Got it. And when you mentioned, just for our viewers, the JCPOA, of course, that was a deal between the Obama administration and Tehran. Through a post on his Truth Social platform, U.S. President Donald Trump replied that Iran has, quote unquote, not yet paid a big enough price for what they have done to humanity. What do you make of that?
This is part of Trump's rhetoric. It still wants, Trump definitely wants to show that it is still fighting the Islamic Republic. It still wants to call out on the very justified opposition against the Islamic government, Islamic Republic. And it's, again, further justification for continued action against Iran. It doesn't want to show, the US wants to show that it is willing to stand up against Iran. What we can see is that the US definitely underestimated how Iran was able to sustain itself throughout the conflict that started in late February. So the US still wants to show itself that it can justify a war. It wants to show that it's standing for the Iranian people, or at least the Iranian opposition. But as we can see, that Iran is quite resilient and it's not going to go anywhere. So this is Trump just going back to rhetoric that he's familiar with.
So many of us are trying to read between the lines these days, but I've got to ask you, is there strategy behind the rhetoric, positioning himself for best deal? Or is Trump at a point with this war, as some have argued, where he's driven by his emotions?
It certainly seems like Trump is driven by emotions. He is known for making these bold statements, quite frankly, quite scary statements. Remember just a few weeks ago, he wanted to obliterate Iran and wipe it off the map, or, these kinds of very strong statements. But we also saw that it wasn't accompanied by that kind of action. So I think people are starting to get around the fact that Trump says what he needs to say to feel like he is saying something that's strong, but ultimately, as we can see, the US is trying to go through the diplomatic channel. It is trying to negotiate. It hasn't gone, of course, the military option is still on the table, but it's still looking at Iran's proposal. It has dismissed it to some extent, but I think we're going to see the US actually go back to the diplomatic table. People, I think, are getting around to the fact that Trump says what he needs to say, and people are trying, governments work around that. So I think we shouldn't try to read too much into what Trump says, but rather what's actually happening at the negotiating table.
aside from the proposal on the table, we saw a buildup in that rhetoric in the past days. The U.S. president made remarks such as Iran would be dying to make a deal and Iran would be choking like a stuffed pig. How close are we to a new military escalation? Will this war start up again?
This is a good question. I think at the moment, everyone's enjoying the ceasefire. Everyone is breathing a sigh of relief. Iranians deserve it. People living in the Gulf deserve it. I mean, the United Arab Emirates, I believe that they're starting to reopen their airspace as well. Iran is also maybe starting to reopen their airspace. So everyone wants a sense of normalcy, and I think people are enjoying it for now. IRGC, the Iranian government, they've said, and Mojtaba Khamenei has also said that they are prepared for continued attacks, and I think they are still on the defensive. The US still has it in their back pocket, but as we've seen, the US doesn't necessarily want a long-term commitment to Iran. I don't think it wants to continue a long-term war. And Iran is right. If the US continues military action, it's not going to go anywhere. We're just going to see barrages of missiles going back and forth with no real solution. So I think it's not in anyone's interest to go back to war. But I think if the US feels that it's cornered, and if it feels that it's not able to, if it feels that Iran is not able to move on the nuclear issue or the Straits of Hormuz issue, then we might see the US going back to military action, but simply as a way to push for what it needs in terms of a longer-term peace plan.
That's Middle East expert Dr. Rowena Binti Abdul Razak. Many, many thanks to you.
Thank you for having me.